Hey, I'm Luke, and welcome to Conquering the JavaScript Interview. This playlist series is going over tons of algorithms and data structures to help you get that job, or at least learn some cool things along the way if that's not your goal. You know, learning is a very honorable goal in and of itself. I do it all the time as a teacher because I got to keep on improving to showing and making sure I'm up to speed and date and everything and all that kind of stuff on all the latest libraries and TypeScript typing and all that kind of fun stuff. So learning, very, very honorable goal as well. If getting a job to conquer an interview is not a goal here. Who cares? Either way, we're here with a goofy little, I guess, algorithm. We've talked about string reverse in previous videos, and we're actually going to be using some of the same concepts there, surprisingly enough. But here we're talking about reversing an integer and also making sure we return a number data type. I had a fun discussion with my coworkers about this one because this is one of those interview-only style questions, just to see if you can be tested to know if you know how to do this and even possibly ask the right questions about this question you're being asked. Like if I was asked this in an interview and my coworkers agreed, the first thing I would do would quirk my eyebrow and be like, why would you ever need to do this? But, well, I wouldn't say it like that flatly to my interviewer, but I would be like, well, there's a lot of things we have to keep in mind here. I mean, I specifically said integer reverse and not number reverse because I'm trying to keep it to whole numbers. Because once the decimal point is involved, things get a little weird. And then on top of that, we also have to remember that in JavaScript, you can't have leading zeros. I can't have 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. So for example, I could not reverse 3, 2, 1, 0 as 0, 1, 3, 2, 1, 0 as 0, 1, 2, 3, because that leading 0 would be cut off. So I'd have to add edge cases to my function to handle that. So this is where we begin to step up from beginner to the next like intermediate tier of skill level when it comes to interview questions. Is not just looking at the problem you're presented and trying to solve it as you're looking at it, meaning like I don't just solve the problem given to me. Sometimes I have to ask a few questions to my interviewer. Like interviewing the interviewer is a very good technique to have, where you might ask some clarifications. Will I only be dealing with whole numbers? Are there decimal places? Do you want me to keep the leading zeros or not keep the leading zeros? Because that will introduce several conditions in the function that can handle those kinds of edge cases. So this is a really good opportunity to keep that in mind, right? Don't just accept what you're given and go with it trying to solve it. Make sure you think about it for a moment and then see if you can ask some clarifying questions and begin thinking of possible stumbles, right? Or possible edge cases for your function. And that will kind of elevate you from that beginner solving only what you're looking at tier to I'm thinking a little ahead and I'm already adding some clarifications to my function, and that will kind of separate you from your average interviewer. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. But we're going to keep it simple here and learn a couple things. Right, so I think it's pretty straightforward, and the important part is here we keep the sign as well. So if it's a negative number, it needs to be negative still, right? And I realize that this input-output shouldn't be here because I'm talking about not dealing with decimals. Let's go ahead and nuke that right there. I mean, it's fairly simple to answer if you had to use a floating decimal point number instead of just a whole integer, but we'll save that for a different video. For now, I'm going to keep it to the straightforward solution, and then in future videos, we'll re-examine maybe this and a few others to talk about maybe performance, edge cases, and making them a bit more advanced and bumping them up from beginner to intermediate tier. Like I said, we're getting on that precipice though. Okay, so like I said, it should be straightforward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 becomes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Negative 42 becomes negative 24, and so on and so forth. Now, let's take a look at this function right here. We need to reverse that number somehow. And there is a loop we could do with some bitwise math. Again, I'm going to include that in a more advanced or intermediate video. For now, we're actually going to cheese this solution in a fairly fun way. I'll have a link in the description below when it comes to reversing a string, because we're going to be just, well, basically doing that. What we're going to do is we're going to take the number, so let's do like a reversed variable here. We're going to take the number and simply convert it into a string value. We're going to, let's go ahead and log some stuff here as well. Reversed. I can type. Who said I couldn't? Remember that return keyword, very important if you're writing this like in a interview setting and they make sure they say write a function that returns something, right? I have to always include the console log so you can actually see some visual output here for now, but you know, don't forget that return keyword. That could, even if you have all the logic right and you don't return a value, they could technically mark you wrong, right? So keep that in mind, especially if you have a very harsh interviewer. So we're going to take integer reverse and call it with our initial 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 number. And as of right now, I don't think it shows what it did. So let's go ahead and include that type of right there. It says string. Now, if I simply log the input number, like so, I think I get a different color output. Yeah, okay, so it is yellow text for number and then white text for string. Just keep that in mind when I'm talking about data types here, because that's important to this particular function. It doesn't say return a string data type. It specifically says return as a number data type. That's the purpose of integer reverse. Okay, so like I said, we have now successfully converted the number to a string. And for those of you that have been watching this series so far, you already know where this is about to go. We're going to use some native methods here to split the string into an array of elements where each element is nothing more than a string number as each element of the array. Arrays have a native method called reverse-arino, which goes to 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All we have to do then is simply join the elements of the array back together into a singular string with no separator. That's what this argument here is. No separator between the elements when we join them back together. And technically, we're almost there, right? Remember the text color differentiation I mentioned before is important. We now have a string version of that reversed number. And this is actually where I talked to my interviewer about like the leading zeros. You want to keep them there because that would be important, because once I try to convert this string to a number, JavaScript will truncate off those leading zeros, which could be one of the edge cases you could discuss with your interviewer to, again, show that you are thinking ahead and not just at what's in front of you. That's that extra echelon, that next tier of skill level. So, we animated with my hands today. We're just about there, right? All we need to do now is rather than just return the reversed number or as a string, we simply need to use the parse integer function built into JavaScript that can take that string and convert it into a number. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and replace my console log with it as well, so we're keeping the visuals in sync here. And there it is, folks. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 returned as a number. But we're not quite done yet, though, are we? We need to also account for the sign, which we have no logic for right now. Meaning if I do the integer value of -42, and then as my input, we see that the sign has been lost. So from here, we have a couple of cool options. We can, for example, rather than just returning the integer itself, we could choose to instead maybe have some kind of conditional to say if the number is less than 0, I want to return the parsed integer and simply multiply it by -1 to make sure we account for the sign of the number argument. I can talk. And that will allow us to keep that value going there, right? So it has an early return if the number is less than 0, and we can even put this into an else block if we wanted to say return that number as is. Otherwise, multiply it by -1. If the number input is a negative number, that means we have to maintain the sign. We can take whatever this parseInt value is and simply multiply it by -1. And again, my console log, I just realized isn't showing that, so let's make sure I'm also logging the correct value as well, like that. Copy and paste that console log down here without the -1 to make sure we can test this both ways now, right? Okay, so like I said, if the input itself is less than 0, return what we were doing before, but simply multiply it by -1, which will account for the sign. There she is. That's what I was looking for. And if it's not a negative number, if we go back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for example, it should not return a negative number by mistake there. And that's one possible way we can handle this problem right here, but the conditional statement. There's actually another cool solution we could do here as well, which utilizes the math object, right? In JavaScript, and there's a particular one called Math.sign, which, thank you IntelliSense right here, returns a sign of the x, aka its input, indicating whether x is positive, negative, or 0. So if we console log Math.sign and pass it, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as its argument right there, we get an output of 1, 1 meaning it is a positive number. If I give it the value of 0, that's where we do get the 0. And if I give it any kind of negative number, like -42, -1 is the output indicating it is a negative number. Meaning what we can end up doing is simply taking the reversed parsed int like so, and then multiplying it by whatever is returned from Math.sign of the initial input number. That way, if the initial input number is negative, Math.sign returns a -1. Multiplying that by our parseInt maintains the sign of our desired output. And I just realized I need to console log this so y'all can actually see what's happening. There we go. And booyah. Positive number reversed correctly, negative number reversed also correctly, and the sign is maintained. So that's some cool trickery. We can talk about this one. We're probably going to revisit this and start talking about how to bump it up to the next tier when we begin talking about maintaining leading zeros and things like that. By what I mean by that is, check this out, 3, 2, 1, 0, 0, 0. The expected output with no other logic, or again, like a newbie first approaching this, like little old me years ago, had to encounter this and bomb the question. But, you know, 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3 may be the desired output, which means we have to talk to our interviewer about some possible edge cases and return types that break away from the specific data type they may want, for example. You might have to return a string and number version maybe in an object where one preserves the zeros and one doesn't. What I mean by that is it did not output 0, 0, 0, 1, 2, 3 because when we parse it to an integer, it simply truncates off those zeros because you don't have numbers with leading zeros in what we do anyway. So yeah, that's that edge case I was talking about, one of them anyway. And again, like if we do a decimal value now, then it also won't maintain that decimal point, so we have to keep that in mind because we're parsing an integer. Integers are whole numbers, right? They're not decimal place numbers. So that's another point we can revisit in the future. I'm going to keep this video a bit shorter here. Remember, in this series, it's all about learning, having fun. Get in the comments with your own solutions or questions. And like my favorite quote to say is, remember, luck is where practice meets opportunity. So that's going to wrap this video up. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Check our description below to get involved in our community. And keep on happy hacking, coders, right? Hack the planet. Hack the planet!